Hello learners, you're welcome to study session 6. Today we shall be talking about the English phrases and clauses. The English phrases and clauses. At the end of study session 6, you should be able to define the English phrase and explain its types. You should also be able to describe the English clause and its types. Phrases and clauses combine to form sentences. This implies that phrases and clauses are components of the English sentence. When you pick an English sentence, come across phrases, clauses that are patterned in some ways. In the hierarchical structure of grammatical units, that is, in the organization of grammatical units, the clause is higher than the phrase. And of course, the sentence is the highest and the largest. So today we'll be talking about the phrases and the clauses. You need to be familiar with the types of English phrases and clauses that you can use in constructing sentences. This is very important because you engage the English language in your day-to-day communication, and you would need to construct sentences to express your opinions, your views or ideas about issues, to establish rapport with people, and also to express your opinion about the world around you. So you need to have a good understanding of the English phrases and the English clauses. What is a phrase? A phrase is a group of words that is not meaningful on its own. When you pick a phrase, it doesn't have a meaning of its own. It is not completely meaningful, and that is why it is a phrase. Phrases are usually named after the most important word in the phrases, and that most important word is also known as the key word or the head word. Phrases perform the same functions that the word classes acting as the key words in them perform. So if you pick a particular kind of phrase, you need to take a look at the key word in that phrase for you to be able to understand whether this phrase is a noun phrase or an adverbial phrase. In other words, in a noun phrase, the key word is a noun, and that noun phrase performs exactly the same functions that a noun performs. So the key word is very important. If you must understand the English phrases, let me take that again. So the key word is very important if you must understand the structure of phrases that we have in English or the clauses. Now we're talking about the phrases. So the key words are very important for you to be able to understand the structure of the English phrases. Types of phrases. We have different types of phrases, but let's begin with the noun phrase. The noun phrase has the MHQ structure, that is the modifier, the head word, and the qualifier. In the noun phrase, the most important word is the noun. I told you that. The most important word in the noun phrase is the noun, and that is the key word. That is the head word. Now, in the structure of the noun phrase, we have the modifier, we have the head word, we also have the qualifier. Modifiers can be, number one, articles. Remember we talked about the articles a, an, and. These articles can occur as modifiers within the structure of the noun phrase. Apart from the articles, we can also have possessive pronouns as modifiers in the structure of the noun phrase. The possessive pronouns that are the subjective cases. These are my, your, their, and so on. We also have degree adverbs which can occur as modifiers in the structure of the phrase. We have degree adverbs such as very, to. And we also have adjectives. Adjectives can also occur as modifiers in the structure of the noun phrase. Examples of such adjectives are beautiful, young, ugly, clever, and so on. Take a look at this example. As you can see, the beautiful brown. There's something missing here. Beautiful brown. Then you are bound to ask, the beautiful brown what? That tells you the role that the keyword plays within the structure of the noun phrase or any phrase at all. The beautiful brown, and you keep quiet. Now, let's add some other words to the phrase we have before us. The beautiful brown leather bag. The beautiful brown leather bag. Beautiful brown leather bag with a black handle. The beautiful brown leather bag with a black handle. Now we have a very important word in this group of words that we have, and that important word is bag. Now there are other words around that word bag. That word bag is the most important word, is the key word, is the head word, and because bag is a noun, then the entire group of words, the beautiful brown leather bag with black hand, is a noun phrase. So that's a very good example of a noun phrase, having the modifier, the head word, and the qualifier. The beautiful brown leather are all modifying the word bag. And then with a black handle, that group of words is modifying the bag, telling us or giving us more information about it. So That's a very good example of a noun phrase. Another example of a noun phrase could be the boy in front, the boy in front of the class, the boy in front of the class. The is the modifier. The word boy is the most important word there, and it's a noun, so that's why we have a noun phrase. In front of the class. All of those words are acting as qualifier for head word. Now we have the verb phrase. The verb phrase is headed by a verb. That is, the most important word in the verb phrase is a verb. There are some possible structures of the verb phrase. Let's take a look at some of them. Number one, we have a verb phrase that has only the lexical verb. Lexical verb, that is a verb that is meaningful on its own. An example is the word cook. So you can say, maybe in a sentence, we can have a sentence that says, I cook every day. I cook every day. The word cook is the only verbal element in that sentence, and it is a verb phrase that contains only a verb, a lexical verb. Now we have another possible structure. That's number two. That's a structure that has the auxiliary verb, that is the modal auxiliary verb, and the lexical. You can see the example on the screen. Will cook. I will cook this morning. I will cook this morning. So will cook is what, that's what we are taking a look at here. Will cook. And the expression will cook is a verb phrase that contains the modal auxiliary will and a lexical verb cook. Number three, we can have a verb phrase structure that has the modal auxiliary, a negator, and a lexical verb. An example is will not cook. I will not cook this morning. I will not cook this morning. Have you ever experienced a situation in which siblings struggle over who is to cook and who is not to cook? There are some girls, when they are growing up, they start to learn to cook. They are eager. They're always very, ready. They're always very much ready to cook. And then there'll be times again as they grow, they start to say, no, I don't want to cook. So when you say, I will not cook, the word will is a modal auxiliary, and then the negator, not, is followed by the lexical verb cook. That's another structure, possible structure of a verb phrase. Number four, we can have a verb phrase that has the structure the structure that contains a modal auxiliary, a negator, and a primary auxiliary, and a lexical. Here there are four elements: a modal auxiliary, a negator, a primary auxiliary, and a lexical verb. And a very good example is will not have cooked. She will not have cooked by now. She will not have cooked by now. She will not have cooked by now. That's a sentence, but our focus is on will not have cooked, which is a very good example of a verb phrase. So here again, we have the modal auxiliary will, the negator not, and then we have the primary auxiliary. Remember that in study session 5, I told you that we have two types of auxiliary verbs. We have the modal auxiliary verbs and the non-modal auxiliary verbs, which are also called the primary auxiliaries. And so here we have a modal auxiliary verb, will, joined to a negator, not, and then joined to a primary auxiliary verb, which is have. Remember that there are three primary auxiliaries. We have the verb be, the verb do, and the verb have. Here, we have used the verb have together with the other elements we have within the verb phrase structure. So we have will not have, then of course the lexical verb cooked. That's a very good example of a verb phrase. There are other forms of the verb phrase in which you have the ing participle form of the lexical verb, like you have in cooking. Then you have the ed participle form, as we have in has cooked or had cooked. She is cooking. In she is cooking, you have is, which is a primary auxiliary, joined to the lexical verb that has an ing structure, the continuous form of the verb cooking. Then in number 2 there, you have the ed participle. Of course, we have another primary auxiliary taken from the verb have, the verb to have. And so you have has cooked. She has cooked a delicious meal. She has cooked, and so on. Then we have the third type, which is the infinitive form, where you have the word to occurring before the verbal element, before the lexical, so that you have a structure that results in to cook. You can say I am to cook. I am to cook. So there you have to cook. You have the infinitive form occurring, the infinitive to occurring before the cook, making it an infinitive form of the verb. You will have to refer to the GNS 101 course materials for further examples on the verb phrase. Now, we will talk about the adjectival phrase. The adjectival phrase is headed by an adjective. The adjectival phrase also has the MHQ structure. Some possible structures of the adjectival phrase are, number one, the structure that has only the head word. Let's pick an adjective. That is the word you can see on the screen. Beautiful. That word beautiful is an adjective. It can exist alone in the structure of the adjectival phrase. An adjectival phrase can be that which contains only the head word. And remember that the head word is the key word, the most important word in that phrase structure. So we have beautiful. So in a sentence like the girl is beautiful, the girl is beautiful. That word beautiful is a very good example of an adjectival phrase that has only the head word in its structure. Number two, there could be a structure of the adjectival phrase in which we have the modifier and the head word. And a very good example is the expression very beautiful. She is very beautiful. The focus is on this other part of the sentence that is the adjectival phrase, and that is very beautiful. In that structure, there is the modifier, that's very, and then there is the head word, beautiful. Number three, there could be a structure of the adjectival phrase in which we have the modifier, the head word, and the qualifier. And that is what you see in the sentence, that reads, she is very beautiful indeed. She is very beautiful indeed. The focus here is on the adjectival phrase, very beautiful indeed. I have decided to give you a sentence so that you'll be able to understand these phrases and how they operate within the sentence structure. So, she is very beautiful indeed. The adjectival phrase that is there is very beautiful indeed. So, in that structure, we have the modifier, which is very, the head word, which is beautiful, and the qualifier, which is indeed. Another structure of the adjectival phrase is that which contains the head word and the qualifier. The head word and the qualifier. And a very good example is beautiful indeed. You can consider the sentence, she is beautiful indeed. She is beautiful indeed. The focus is on the adjectival phrase, beautiful, where you have beautiful as the head word. Remember that that word beautiful is an adjective, and that is why it is an adjectival phrase. And then the word indeed is a qualifier used after the adjective to give further information. She is beautiful indeed. Now, let's talk about the adverbial phrase. The adverbial phrase is headed by an adverb. We are going to take a look at some of the possible structures of the adverbial phrase. Number one, we have the adverbial phrase that has the apex or an apex in its structure. By the word apex, I mean a lexical adverb. That is an adverb that is meaningful on its own, that has independent meaning, an adverb that has content meaning. So if you pick the word beautifully, that's an adverb. And it can occur alone in the structure of the adverbial phrase. In the sentence, she sings beautifully. She sings beautifully. The adverbial phrase in that sentence is beautifully. And in that adverbial phrase, we have only the apex, which is beautifully. Number two, we can have an adverbial phrase structure that contains the tempera and the apex. An example is seen in the sentence, she sings very beautifully. She sings very beautifully. The adverbial phrase in that sentence is very beautifully. And here we have very as the tempera, a word which occurs before the apex. So we have the tempera and the apex, very beautifully. Number three, there is also a possible structure of the adverbial phrase where we have the tempera, the apex, and the limiter. The tempera, the apex, and the limiter. You can see that in the sentence, she sings very beautifully indeed. The adverbial phrase in that sentence, she sings very beautifully indeed, is very beautifully indeed. And here, again, we have very as the temporal, beautifully as the apex, and indeed as the limiter. Number 4, there is the possibility of an adverbial phrase structure that contains only the apex and the limiter. The apex and the limiter. And a very good example of that is the one we have in the sentence, she sings beautifully indeed. She sings beautifully indeed. The word beautifully there is the apex, and then the expression indeed is the limiter. You have to understand the fact that the apex is very important, and we cannot do without it. We cannot do without the apex in the structure of the adverbial phrase. All the other elements within the structure, that is the limiter, the temporal coming before the apex, and then the limiter coming after the apex. Those two elements are optional, they are not obligatory, but the apex is very important. And that is why the apex is usually an adverb, and also that is why the structure is an adverbial phrase. Other examples of the temporal are more, so, extremely, somewhat, and so on. Other examples of the limiter are than that, than before, than expected, enough, than enough. Always remember that the lexical adverbs which have content meanings are regarded as the apex. Now let's talk about the prepositional phrase. The prepositional phrase is made up of a preposition attached to a noun phrase. Examples are on the mountain, in the valley, maybe you will say on the land and in the sea. You remember there's a popular song like that. On the mountain, in the valley, on the land, and in the sea. That's a very beautiful song that provides us with a very good example of contexts in which the prepositions that have been adopted in that song can be used. Now, prepositions are complex in nature, and that's why you have to be very careful when you use them. They could lead to confusion, and they could also be confusing. So you need to be very careful. Ensure that you use the appropriate prepositions in their appropriate context. Let's take a look at the example we have on the screen. We pray to God to abide by or with us as we abide by or with His rules. Which of the words written in bold letters do you think is appropriate? We pray to God to abide, is it with us or by us? As we abide, is it by His rules or with His rules? We pray to God to abide with us as we abide by His rules. That is the correct form. We pray to God to abide with us as we abide by His rules. Now, if you say we pray to God to abide by us as we abide with His rules, then you are creating a scene in which you are going to put the rules beside you and you are going to abide with the rules. You stay together with the rules. But the intention here is that you obey the rules, so you abide by rules. We pray to God to abide with us, stay with us, be with us, as we abide by His rules, as we obey His rules. There are many more examples in the GNS 101 course materials, and you'll find them very interesting. Now, let's talk about the clauses. Remember that at the beginning of this session, I told you that we are going to be talking about the English phrases and clauses. So now it is time to talk about clauses. A clause is next to the phrase in rank. It is a group of words that contains a verb. Now, talking about the structure of the clause, a clause is divided into subject and predicate, except in cases of ellipses and commands. And when you talk about subject, that is the performer of the action that is expressed in a given sentence. And the predicate is the other part, that is the part separated from the subject, which contains the verb. The verb, that is the action that is expressed in the sentence. There are two types of clauses. we have the main or independent clauses and the subordinate or dependent clauses. Let's talk about the main clauses first. The main clauses are also called independent clauses, which means they are complete in meaning and they can therefore stand alone to convey a complete thought. So when you pick a clause that is a main clause, it means it is meaningful on its own. It can stand alone. In fact, a main clause is a simple sentence. A main clause is a sentence, a simple sentence, and a sentence must convey a complete meaning. So we have examples on the screen. Number 1, John caught the ball. That's meaningful. Number 2, the singers sang beautifully. That's number 2. And that's meaningful. Number 3, sweep the floor. Sweep the floor. You may wonder why we regard this as a clause, a simple sentence. It is meaningful, sweep the floor. It is meaningful. A main clause can be in form of a command, and that is what we have in that example. That's example number 3, sweep the floor. It is meaningful, it conveys a complete thought. Now, let's talk about subordinate clauses. Subordinate clauses are not meaningful on their own. That is, they have to depend. They have to depend on the independent clauses for them to have complete meanings. Remember that I told you that a subordinate clause is also known as a dependent clause. That means it has to depend on that structure, the independent clause, for it to be meaningful. Subordinate clauses are usually introduced by subordinators. This is why there are different types of subordinate clauses. Now, let's take a look at some of these subordinate clauses. We have the noun clauses. These are introduced by that and what or any other subordinator that can make the subordinate clause answer the question, what? Examples are what you have here. Everybody knows that you are the manager. Everybody knows that you are the manager. Look at it. Everybody knows. That is a main clause. It's meaningful. Everybody knows. Everybody knows. It's meaningful. It's a main clause. But the question is, knows what? That you are the manager. If I just appear before you and I say that you are the manager, that you are the manager, does that make sense to you? No, it doesn't. But if I stand before you and I say, everybody knows, everybody knows, it's meaningful. At least I've conveyed to you a meaning. Everybody knows. Then the question is, everybody knows what? Everybody knows that you are the manager. So here we have a very good example of a noun clause. The noun clause there is that you are the manager. That you are the manager. Look at it this way. That you are the manager is what everybody knows. That you are the manager is what everybody knows. Now, everybody knows that you are the manager. So that second part of the sentence, that you are the manager, is a subordinate clause. If I say that to you, only that you are the manager, it doesn't make sense. But everybody knows that you are the manager makes sense. So everybody knows is a main clause added to the subordinate clause that you are the manager. So a very good example of a noun clause is that expression that you are the manager. Look at the second example. The old woman saw what you stole. That is a sentence. The part of the sentence that concerns us now, because we are talking about the noun clause, is what you stole. What you stole. So I can say the old woman saw. The old woman saw it. The old woman saw what? The old woman saw. The old woman saw what you stole. What you stole. What you stole is a very good example of a noun clause introduced by the subordinator what. Let's talk about the adjectival or relative clauses. These are introduced by relative pronouns such as who, whose, whom, which, and that. Not that. The relative clause answers the question which or who. Examples are I saw the boy. I saw the boy. Who stole the money? In that sentence, I saw the boy who stole the money. Our focus is on the adjectival clause, which is who stole the money. Who stole the money? If I stand before you again and I say, who stole the money? I'm not asking a question. It's not a question. Who stole the money? Who stole the money? I saw the boy who stole the money. Who stole the money is an adjectival clause that gives us further information about the boy. So it's a subordinate clause, and it is not complete until you bring it together with I saw the boy who stole the money. That is when you'll be able to understand the full meaning of that expression. That is why it is also a subordinate clause. Take a look at this example. I wrote the book which you bought. I wrote the book. That's a very good example of a main clause. Now, which you bought. Which you bought is not meaningful on its own, so it is a subordinate clause. But what kind of subordinate clause is it? It is an adjectival or relative clause. Which you bought. It is introduced by the subordinator which. So if I say which you bought, which you bought, which you bought, it doesn't make any sense until I attach it to the main clause. I wrote the book, and that is why a subordinate clause depends on the independent or main clause for completion of meaning. Example number 3, that is the man. That's another main clause. But then when I say, whose child won the award? It's not a question. That is the man whose child won the award. So the expression, whose child won the award, does not make sense until I bring it together with the main clause. That is the man. Oh, the man whose child won the award. So, whose child won the award, again, is a subordinate clause, but it is an adjectival clause that is introduced by whose child won the award. Now we talk about adverbial clauses. Adverbial clauses are introduced by adverbs which act as subordinators. Remember also that there are different types of adverbial clauses depending on the type of subordinators that introduce them. Examples are, number 1, adverbial clause of time, which is introduced by when, since, or during. Example is, we were eating when she came in. We were eating when she came in. So, when she came in italics there, is the adverbial clause, and it is not meaningful on its own. It's a subordinate clause. A subordinate clause that is not meaningful on its own until you attach it to an independent clause. We were eating when she came in. If I also stand before you, I like to use that example. I just stand before you and I say, when she came in. When she came in. When she came in. When she came in. It's not meaningful. But you get to understand the full meaning of that when I bring it together with the main clause. We were eating when she came in. Now, we also have an adverbial clause of place introduced by where. Adverbial clause of place introduced by where. I saw the money where you hid it. I saw the money where you hid it. Now, the adverbial clause there is where you hid it. Where you hid it. That's what we are talking about now. But that also does not make sense until you bring it together with the main or independent clause. I saw the money. That's complete on its own. But where you hid it, where you hid it, where you hid it, it's not complete on its own until we bring it together with, the independent clause. Another example is, another type of adverbial clause is the adverbial clause of manner. Adverbial clause of manner, which is introduced by has, tells us how an action is performed. Describe the man as you saw him. Describe the man as you saw him. As you saw him. As you saw him. That's the adverbial clause. And the adverbial clause is that of manner. The main clause there is describe the man. I can ask you to do that for me. Please describe the man. But when I stand before you and I say, as you saw him, as you saw him, does that make any sense on its own? That's why it is a subordinate clause. So describe the man as you saw him. will give us a complete thought. So as you saw him is incomplete on its own. Another type of adverbial clause is that of reason, adverbial clause of reason. It is introduced by because. Because. I traveled abroad because I wanted to see the Queen. I traveled abroad because I wanted to see the Queen. Because I wanted to see the Queen, that is the adverbial clause. Again, it is not meaningful on its own. Because I wanted to see the Queen. You are still expecting that there will be additional information. And that is what you get to find in the main clause. I traveled abroad. I traveled abroad can stand alone as a main clause. But because I wanted to see the Queen, it can't stand alone as a main clause. It doesn't have a complete thought or meaning that is being conveyed to us. So I traveled abroad because I wanted to see the Queen will be meaningful because we have the main clause providing the necessary information for us to understand the subordinate clause. And also because the subordinate clause relies or depends on the independent clause for it to have a meaning conveyed to us. In your GNS 101 study materials, you can find further information about that and other examples of adverbial clauses that there are. Well, in study session 6, you have learned that phrases and clauses are elements or constituents of a sentence. You have also learned types of phrases and clauses. And all this should help you in constructing good English sentences. Thank you for listening. I hope to see you in the next session. It's bye for now.